Welcome back. So what I want to do now in this video is talk about some of the pitfalls, the common problems that arise when you're writing recursive solutions. So one thing that happens more often than you might think is that you don't have a base case or your base case is wrong. So what I mean by that is that if we go back to factorial here, without this base case right here, this code just keeps going and adding function calls to the stack over and over. So if we just plugged in 2, factorial of 2, it's going to do return 2 times factorial of 1. Factorial of 1 is going to return 1 times factorial of 0. Factorial of 0 returns 0 times factorial of -1, and it just keeps going forever. There's no end in sight. And if I do run this right now, you'll see what we get. Maximum call stack size exceeded. So this means that actually, I don't exactly know what will happen if we do try and step through this, but if I try it out, you'll see that our stack just continues to grow over and over and over. So I could keep clicking forever and stepping through this. We're at 100 something calls on the stack right now, but there is a maximum size. It does differ depending if you're on Node, what engine you're using. I think that it's somewhere around 10,000 calls. I'm not positive though, but there's a maximum and we're going to exceed it. So if I just resume the script execution, you'll see we get that error, maximum call stack size exceeded. Okay, so that's a big problem. Another thing that we could run into is returning the wrong thing or forgetting to return in the first place. So what I mean by that is if instead of returning, so let's say we have our base case, the correct base case, so it should stop. But what if we were just returning num times factorial of num? And this is a simple example. It's easy to identify the problem, but sometimes your code is a lot longer, and sometimes it's harder to walk through each individual step if you don't take the time to pay attention to what you're actually returning. Because even though we have our base case, it doesn't help. We're never going to hit it because we're returning, in the case of factorial 2, we're returning 2 times factorial of 2, which is going to return 2 times factorial of 2 and spin forever. Well, not quite forever, as you'll see. We hit a problem. There we go. Maximum call stack size exceeded. One more potential pitfall is if instead of a return here, if we had a console.log 1, for example. So we still have the base case. Oh, let's change this back to num -1. So everything looks good except that we're console.logging 1 when num is equal to 1. And what do we get? Same thing. Maximum call stack size exceeded. Because we printed out 1. Here, if we, let's refresh and do the same thing. Step through this. If we look at the call stack, okay, so factorial of 2 is called, so we return 2 times factorial of 1. Well, factorial of 1 isn't returning anything, so it doesn't stop execution here. Remember, that's the way that we pop this thing off the stack is by returning, but we're not returning 1. So instead, this is just a nice little extra thing. Oh, by the way, if num is equal to 1, print out 1. But then keep going. Return 1 times factorial of 0. So you'll see that's what happens. Num is now 1. We return 1 times factorial of 0. Now num is 0, and we keep going. And if I keep clicking, you'll see num keeps going down, -7 now we're at. And we'll keep going until we hit the maximum call stack size, or we exceed it. So I'm going to fix that and put it back as return 1. So the importance of returning is, that's what recursion is built on. The idea of this call stack where all these things are dependent on one another, waiting, they're kind of primed in a chain, but we still have to return some value at the end to then send back and then to add or multiply or do something with to send back to the previous one to keep going until we get to the original function call of factorial 2. All right, so let's just make sure it still works. Let's do factorial of 5. What do we get? 120. Okay, it's working. Now, one note, in Chrome, the message it's giving me is, maximum call stack size exceeded. This is generally what's known as a stack overflow. Think of a stack, it's overflowing, right? Too many frames on that stack, too many functions trying to be called. So you've probably come across that term before in the name of a popular website, Stack Overflow. That's where it comes from. When you have, usually it's a recursive call. If you see that message, just keep that in mind. This means that your recursion is not stopping. There's never rock bottom. Okay, so that wraps up what I want to say about common problems. You don't have a base case, or you're forgetting to return a value, or returning the wrong thing, all of those can result in a Stack Overflow, which is not good.